Well, good morning, YouTube. All right, guys, another off-grid project we're working on here. You guys remember WATTCYCLE? They sent me that 12-volt, 100 amp hour battery a few months back, and now they want me to review this 300 amp hour 12-volt battery. And it just so happens that I need a portable power station in a couple of days. So we're going to build this into a really cheap and easy power station that's mobile for a fraction of the cost of what it costs to buy one of those solar generator power station thingies. So here we have the WATTCYCLE 12 volt, 300 amp, lithium iron phosphate battery. And you saw in the construction in the last video, we took these things apart and they are constructed very, very well. In addition, we bought a reliable electric pure sine wave inverter, this time in 1500 watts. And as you can see, this is a much larger physically converter than the last one. In a past video where I was doing a capacity test upgrading the lithium from the lead acid, we used a 1500 watt rated inverter that we picked up at Walmart, and it wasn't even close to being able to actually output 1500 watts. So I did a bunch of research, and online, Reliable seems to have a really good name in this industry. A lot of people are using them for off-grid solar systems, and they have been very, well, reliable. So I decided to give it a try. It's definitely a little bit more expensive than the other one was, but not by much, believe it or not. So real quick and dirty, we're going to throw this thing together as a power station. We're going to take it to Marlborough, Massachusetts with us tomorrow, and we're going to use it there as a power supply. And the reason we're doing that is because they charge $200 and something extra for them to run an extension cord to our booth. And I think that's just ludicrous, and we're not using any kind of crazy power. We need to be able to run a TV and charge our laptops, and that's pretty much it. And I think this will be more than sufficient to do that, but we're going to put it to the test and see. Now, the battery came with terminal ends. Let me unpackage those real quick. So there are 4 terminals plus a black and a red terminal protector. That should be all we need. In fact, it's twice of what we need. That's all we need. And the inverter came with a couple of fuses, some terminal protectors and hold downs, some nuts washers, and it even came with 2 cables to make the connections from the inverter to the battery. Now, prior to recording, I played with some configurations here, thought about maybe putting this on its side or whatever, but it looks like it fits almost perfect just like that. It keeps our terminals nice and close. In fact, our cables might be too long, but we'll find a way to route them. The handles are long enough that even with that on top, I can still pick this thing up and move it around. And for simplicity, I think we're just going to use some Velcro, and we're going to Velcro this right to the top. That way I can just pick it up, carry it around wherever I want, and not worry about it falling off. All right, guys, so I've put the battery on charge and let it charge up for many, many hours. The green light is on. That means it's 100%. So now we're going to go ahead and do this final assembly, and we'll give it a test. So I'm going to clean the top surface of the battery, make sure that there's no grease, oil, dirt, or any kind of residue that would stop our adhesive from sticking on the Velcro. And of course, I'm going to do the same to the bottom of the inverter. Okay, so I encountered a design flaw. On the bottom of the inverter, there were a couple of screws that went through the bottom holding stuff together, and that wasn't going to allow it to sit flat on top of the battery, and I can't believe I didn't notice it by setting it on there. And the Velcro wasn't thick enough to kind of compensate for it. So what I did is I found a scrap aluminum plate, and I just cut it out and bolted it to make the bottom flat. The nice thing is that also leaves that air gap in between there, which would be good for cooling when it comes to running higher loads. So now I will Velcro this onto the battery. Well, design flaw here too. Look how close that becomes to the terminals. This is aluminum. If that were to touch that and that at the same time, we then have a short circuit. Maybe we got to trim this back a little bit further or something. I don't know. Okay, well, I stuck it on there anyways. It is now secure, and I put a rubber guide on there to help prevent those from touching one another. All right, so now let me just hook up the cables, and we can actually test this thing and see if it works, which it will. All right, the leads that came with the inverter were kind of long, so I actually looped them from the terminal underneath and back around and up. And it all looks like it's going to work out just fine. Those are hand tight. I'm still going to snug these down. I'm not quite sure which way I want to route our charging lead so that we can charge it. It just doesn't fit anywhere nicely. Unless maybe I go like that. I don't know, unless maybe I go like that. I'm not sure. We shall see. All right, guys, and there we go. Everything is hooked up. Everything is tightened down. Like I said, the charging lead is just kind of hanging off. Maybe I'll find another piece of Velcro so I can just stick that to the side maybe. Well, no, because it'll get away with that. I don't know. Maybe I'll go this side. Either way, it's there. It's all hooked up. Powered on. Here we go, 13.3 volts. And it's putting out 122 volts. Let's grab something and test it. All right, I'm grabbing my circular saw because it's actually a fairly high load. Let's look and see what the wattage rating is. All right, so this may actually be a little bit overkill for this. It doesn't give a watt rating on it, but it says it's 15 amp at 120 volts. So you do the math on that, it's more than 1500 watts. So we're gonna try it anyways. Okay, so we are plugged in. You can see we have power. Let's make sure everything's clear of this blade. Let's see if it will do it. Wow, that was actually pretty impressive. All right, I'm happy with that. Now, for our practical purposes with this, that is way more amperage than what we're gonna need to run. We're gonna be charging our iPads, our phones, keeping the battery up in the laptops. This should be more than sufficient for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing loaded in the truck. And actually the only other thing I'm gonna add to it, just in case we need a little bit more length from it and we need a couple more outlets, I've got some of these power strips here. We'll take one of those with us as well. Okay, all loaded in the truck. Tomorrow we head to Massachusetts and we'll see how it performs throughout the weekend there. So stay tuned for the rest of it. All right guys, so we're now here at the Natural Living Expo, and yesterday we did our setup. I brought in our battery bank and I put it down here, and I got the little power strip plugged into it. We got the TV plugged into the power strip, and hopefully all this will work and last all weekend. All right, so we're gonna turn the system on. There we go. We've still got 13.2 volts, 13.3. All right, it's up to power. Now we can go turn everything on, make sure it all works good. All right, we have power.
This is my 6th time here, but I never get it configured.
All right, guys, and it looks like we've got it up and running on the slideshow. All right, guys, it is now 6 p.m. and we're closing down. We just shut the TV down. It's actually been working all day long on that battery. Let's see what the voltage is on it. Still got 13.2 volts. It's barely even used any of its power. All right, guys, and closing time is just about here. I just turned off the TV. We're gonna look down here and see how well our power supply is still doing. There we go, still at 13.2, right where we started this morning and ended last night. So running this TV setup here for 2 days. Now, it turns out we never needed to charge a phone or run a laptop. The TV is the only thing that it ran, but for 2 days, and we barely even touched its power. All right, guys, I'm here working on building a deck at my house, and we're gonna put this battery to another use here. We still got the reliable inverter on top of it. You saw that we used it in Marlborough to run the TV display for the 2 days we were there. And I don't think that even came close to neither the inverter's capabilities nor the battery's capabilities. So I have not charged it since then. It's been sitting for a week since we've been home from that event. And now we're gonna use it to run my circular saw because I'm building a deck right here behind me. So let's see how it does.
Now, I don't absolutely need this portable power station right here because I've got an outlet right up there on the porch where the air compressor is plugged in, but I still want to kind of torture this thing and see how it all works. The circular saw is a 15 amp saw, so it should be pretty close to the maximum output of this inverter and not even close to the maximum output of the battery. But we're going to be using it over and over. We're hopefully going to be making a number of cuts. We'll see how long it lasts and how it does. Well, first couple of cuts using the power station, and it did power the saw up and it worked. I made the cuts. However, I could tell that the saw wasn't really running at its full potential. Just there was a different sound to it, but it worked, which is the important part. All right, guys, one of the nice things about having the portable power station is instead of running an extension cord over here from the truck, I just moved the battery over here, and we're gonna make these two cuts to get this out of the way, and then we'll cut our cross piece to length afterwards. So let me get the saw set up at a 45-degree angle and make these cuts. All right, so now I have cut my angle, got a little bit of an overhang just like on the rest of the deck. All right, because not all of our boards are exactly the same length, we just kind of let them lay in here. Didn't quite come to the end of our deck. So we're gonna cut a straight line here, and then we're gonna put a banding piece on the end, leaving a little bit of an overhang like we've got right there. There we go. Now we've got a nice straight cut. Now we just gotta make our band piece to match. So I do got to give a little shout out to WATTCYCLE, but we really put this thing to the test while building this. This battery made every single circular saw cut over the last week and a half we've been working on this, and not once did I recharge it. Now there were a couple of cuts, like when we were notching the deck to put the posts in, where we did use the battery powered reciprocating saw, but every single deck board, every single top plank, the steps, everything was cut with that rigid circular saw plugged into this reliable 1500 watt inverter, and all powered by the WATTCYCLE 300 amp hour 12 volt battery. Remember, we used it in Marlborough first to run the TV for 2 days, and then brought it here. And as of right now, it still has, it looks like we're still at 13.1 volts. Now, last night after I made the final cut, it was at like 12.8 or something like that. So it's rested overnight, and it's still cold out here, guys. It's what, 34 degrees, 35 degrees right now. The only problem I saw with this setup, and it wasn't the battery, I think it was the inverter. So remember, this is a 1500 watt inverter. That saw is rated for a maximum of 15 amps at 120 volts, and that's about 1850 watts. So the saw could have used more power. So I think the inverter, if we would have had a 2000 watt inverter, maybe 2500 watt inverter, would have probably worked a little smoother. There were times where like I would bind up the saw blade a little bit and it would put the inverter into protect mode, not the battery, just the inverter. The power was still there. It just wouldn't send AC voltage out to the device. So I learned to be a little bit careful with it, let it spool up a little bit better before making my cut. And after that, everything worked perfect. I don't know how many hundreds of cuts we made with that saw, but this battery sure had the capacity to do it. And I'm pretty sure there's more left in it. Jess is enjoying the deck already. Well, guys, guess what? Time flies. I know it's been a couple seconds for you, but for me, it's been 6 or 7 weeks since we built that deck with this portable power station that I built. And since finishing that project, this portable power station has actually been sitting on my back porch. And here in Western North Carolina, we've had some pretty cold temperatures, been below freezing a number of times. In fact, we just had a blizzard come through this weekend. Now, it's been back here in the office for about 48 hours, so it's back up to room temperature. But it got me thinking, after doing all those cuts on that deck, what kind of capacity is left in it? So I'm going to pull out the trusty capacity meter thingy-majiggy-doogie, Marlborough, whatchamacallit, and we're going to test, see what's left in it. All right, so we have got the capacity tester hooked up to the battery. As you can see, there's still dust and dirt and sawdust on there from the project. Now all I have to do is plug this in. All right, so now it's plugged in. It shows we still have 13.1 volts. So we are going to start 0. So we still got some. Is there a way to reset that? There we go. Now we're all at zeros. Now let's let this test begin. All right, I got that at 170. Now we'll turn up the fine tune knob. Try to get it closer to 180. All right. Close enough. All right, let's see how long it goes for. All right, guys, we have been on here now for 1 hour and 53 minutes, and we've only used 26 amp hours. Just over, actually almost 27. What's crazy about this is typically when we're starting from scratch and we've got a fully charged battery and we're doing this test, and I know it's a 300 amp hour battery, and when we're at 150 amps used, I can kind of guess we're about halfway. The problem here is I have no idea where we were at when we started. So we're trying to figure out what's left, but there's no anticipation, or there's too much anticipation, maybe, just not knowing when this test is going to end. So we're just going to let it ride out until I come in here and it's turned off. All right, guys, and we have our final results. It looks like it took 13.37 hours to use up the other 192.39 amp hours, 2,390.99 watt hours. Now, I have to be 100% honest. I was not expecting there to be that much capacity left in this battery. I didn't count how many times I pulled the trigger on the circular saw, but as you can see from the beginning of the video, it was a lot of cuts to build that deck. And even some of the areas where I had to notch 4x4s, where I cut 2 lines in, and then I used the saw to completely clear a cavity in order to notch a post. It took a lot of energy, but we still had almost 200 amp hours left in this battery. So we just barely used 1/3 of the capacity, just a little bit over 1/3 of the capacity, which is pretty amazing. And keep in mind, that's even after using it for 2 days at the Natural Living Expo, running the television with a continuous loop slideshow on. So 16 or so hours of that, still pretty amazing. Now, when it comes to affordability, I think this do-it-yourself type of power station is a great option. So this setup, as is configured, the battery was $529, the inverter was $199, for a total of $728. Now, the cheapest EcoFlow Delta I could find was $629. So yes, it was $100 cheaper, and it actually had a little bit more watt output. It was an 1800 watt output instead of a 1500 watt output, but it only had 1/3 of the battery capacity. So if you were to bump that inverter up to match that, you'd be a little bit over that, because the reliable inverters are relatively expensive, and you could have 3 times the inverter for about $100 more. So sometimes it may not make sense to spend big money on some of these really fancy solar generator stations. Now, I said solar, that's one thing this was missing, but you can buy inexpensive charge controllers as well. So you can hook up a ground array or a portable solar panel to it. And keep in mind, the solar generators, they don't come with solar panels much either. And if they do, their prices are way up there. But you can spend up to $6,000, $7,000, or $8,000 on some of these power stations. Obviously a little bit more capable than this, but this is definitely an affordable option. All right, so all in all, I believe that this is a fantastic battery. It did everything I needed it to do and still had plenty of reserve capacity to go. To use this for a home backup, an RV application, or even a portable power station like this would be a wise decision if you needed something to facilitate those needs. But before we close the video, I want to bring up a couple of points. Many of you that are watching this might also be familiar with William Prowse. He's a DIY Solar on YouTube. He's got a huge channel, and he's kind of a wizard with this kind of stuff. I mean, he's really, really good at doing these, and he does a lot of testing. And he's kind of inspired me with my solar and lithium battery ventures. He's the one I referred to when I wanted to build this system in Goliath, and he's kind of where I learned a lot of my information so that I could plan and build that system. With that said, he just released a video a few days ago on this same exact battery, and although it passed the capacity test, he did on teardown find a couple of issues that I want to address here. And I will put a link to that video in the description as well. So upon teardown, he found out that the actual cells within this battery are only 280 amp hour cells. So even though this is still a great battery and has a great capacity, and in the testing, it's still put out more than 300 amp hours, it's technically mislabeled. It should be labeled as a 280 amp hour battery. And with that said, WATTCYCLE has seen his video and taken his advice, and they are going to relabel the battery. And those of you that already have a battery that's labeled as a 300 that's actually a 280, there is some compensation available to you, and you might want to look into that. The other thing he noticed that was a big problem was the surge capacity. So it will take like 800 and something amps to get this BMS to trip quickly. And that could actually be a little bit dangerous on high loads. So if you are going to use this in a system where you're going to be expecting some high loads, it is recommended to put an inline fuse in there that's rated for what you're actually going to use, because the BMS may not quite trip. Again, WATTCYCLE has seen this, taken this into consideration, and in all new models, they are going to change the programming of the BMS so that it will have a positive disconnect with a lower load. So although he wasn't happy with that overcurrent protection, he also did a cold temperature protection test as well. And like you'd expect, the WATTCYCLE performed very well in that test. Is almost instantaneous when below freezing. The BMS disconnected so that you can't charge while freezing, because that's really bad for these batteries. Anyway, guys, I think this video was probably long enough. Now you can see a practical use for this battery and how great it actually is. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're interested in any WATTCYCLE products, there will be a link in the description, and that link will offer you a discount at purchase with the company. So I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until the next time I see you, keep those engines running.